Hello, everybody. We are moving on to our first lecture with content in it. Um, yeah. We're going to go over what anthropology is real quickly in this lecture, and then we're going to move on from there. All right. So, again, please make sure to do the quiz week 1 and reflection 1 by tomorrow, Friday. Um, should take you like maybe 20 minutes, but it should be pretty quick. Okay. Also remember that reflection 1 does not need to be 600 words. It does not need to be 600 words. It's just you need to give me the answers to the questions and a quick, yeah, you'll see it. I honestly, I just want you to get used to doing the work and like following the directions and stuff, and then it'll be good to go. All right. So, what other academic fields are similar to anthropology? This is a think about question. I just want you to have this question in the back of your mind while I'm going through the lecture, and then we can come back to it later. All right. So, what is anthropology? Anthropology offers a broader view, a distinctive comparative cross-cultural perspective. However, anthropology is much more than the study of non-industrial peoples. It is a comparative science that examines all societies, ancient and modern, simple and complex. The study of human societies and cultures and their development. This is the same definition by Google and by Webster. Now, anthropology, I'm going to give you an even easier definition, is quite simply the study of humanity, right? And because humans are so complicated, and because we are very interested in what it means to be human, there's like 4 major subfields. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Now, what is interesting about anthropology is that it kind of leaves nothing behind, right? So it studies things that are now, things that are in the past. We study things like our culture, our biology. We cover everything. Okay, but no matter what, and you're going to see that why that question in the beginning is the way it is. You have to ask yourself, like, what's the difference between anthropology and all these other fields? And the only difference, or the only thing that makes it different at all, is that anthropology focuses on humans, period, right? So, like, why is there a? Well, we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it later. All right. So, some important points. Anthropology is the holistic, biocultural, and comparative study of humanity. It is the systemic exploration of human biological and cultural diversity across time and space. Examining the origins of and changes in human biology and culture, anthropology provides explanations for similarities and differences among humans and their societies. Okay, so again, with this, there's a lot to break down here in this paragraph, right? But like, what it wants to impress upon you is it's holistic, it's biocultural, which basically means that it's trying its best to study everything, right? Holistic, it doesn't just look at one thing; it looks at multiple different dimensions of the same thing, and it's biocultural, meaning that it's again covering everything, not just biology of humanity, but also the cultural side of humanity, right? Now, systemic exploration, that just means that it's like scientific in the sense that it has a method, right? And if you look at other fields of study like sociology, the real difference between sociology and social culture anthropology is literally like the way they go about their research, right? But if you go about your research differently, you'd be surprised how different that makes your research. Anyways, across time and space, right? Sounds really complicated, but it's not. Time, right? Are we talking about now? Or are we talking about 2,000 years in the past? Space. Are we talking about here? Are we talking about California? Are we talking about China? Are we talking about Mexico? What are we talking about, right? Examining the origins in and changes in human biology and culture, anthropology provides explanation for some of the differences among humans and their societies. I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say, aside from similarities and differences, it also shows us what it means to be human. Okay, what are the lines between being human and not being human? All fields of anthropology consider variation in time and space. Each also examines adaptation, the process by which organisms cope with environmental stresses. In anthropology's biocultural perspective is a particularly effective way of approaching interrelations between biology and culture. Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images. Okay, so what this is basically saying is that when we talk about anthropology, right, one of the things that is very interesting to anthropologists across all 4 fields is the way we adapt to things, right? And so obviously, if you see, like if you think about it in a biological sense, like when it's hot, we sweat, right? When it's cold, we shiver, right? These are biological responses, right? These are adaptations to the environment. However, there are other types of environmental stresses too that are not biological, such as the stress to make money, right? People, the way people, quote unquote, hustle for money is very different between everybody. Why? Because the stress of making money is so great and so or not, I shouldn't say universal. It's so consistent amongst, maybe Americans or people who live in New York City or whatever, that people have to find different ways to make money. How do you cope with the pressure of being a good son or being a good partner, whatever, right? These are all things that are that require adaptation. Okay. Now, anthropology considers biology, society, culture, and language, linking anthropology to many other field science and humanity. So, again, remember the main point of anthropology is to study humans, right? No matter in what way or what focus, or sorry, or what in what method, the main point is to study humans. And so within anthropology, there are 4 major fields, and we're going to go over those 4 fields. So, social culture anthropology, biological physical anthropology, linguistic anthropology, anthropological archaeology. These are the 4 major fields of anthropology. Okay. Now, culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So, culture is very important because that's, quite frankly, it's, well, in my opinion, it's like the most important concept in anthropology, but it's something that we shape our lives around without even really knowing it, right? So we'll talk about this later, actually, but yeah, I just want you to know what culture is. So a lot of times people confuse culture with geography. People confuse culture with ethnicity. These are not, although they're related, they're not exactly the same. If someone's culture is quote unquote Chinese, what does that mean? Right? Does that mean that person is from China? Does that mean that those practices are from China? Does it mean that their skin color is a certain color? Because if there was a white dude that lived in China and then came to America and then had kids here, would those kids be considered Chinese or are they considered American? Why? Culture is much deeper than that, right? Culture is about the influences of our day-to-day lives, things that you might not think about, like school, like work, like the office space, like I don't know, the time in which the playoffs start, right? These are all cultural influences that influence the way we live our lives. We'll go over this more in depth during the cultural section, but let's get into the quick introductions. So, social culture anthropology. Cultural anthropology explores the cultural diversity of the present and the recent past. There are 2 ways to do social culture anthropology: ethnography and ethnology. Ethnography is field work to collect data from a specific group and community, and ethnology compares, contrasts, and generalizes. So let me break this down in the easiest way possible. Anthropology in its like OG form is like, hey, there's a group of people that we don't know a lot about. Let me train you to learn about culture, and you can go over there and learn about those people, right? That's kind of like the OG, like system. Funny enough, New York City was the founding place of American anthropology by Franz Boas at Columbia University. Zio Hurston, Margaret Mead. I think there's a couple more, but main point is New York City has a very significant history in anthropology. In fact, I think there's quite a few schools named after the anthropologists that did a lot of work. I think, isn't there Margaret Mead High School or middle school? Anyways, Margaret Mead was like an OG like anthropologist, and she's famous for her work with gender in or what it is to be a woman and gender and sexuality with the Samoan people. Now, what's interesting though is that people think that she went in there looking for those things, but people who know anthropology know that she didn't do that. What happened was they were basically like, yo, we got this island, we don't know a lot about the people, we want to know more about the people. Can you send someone over to learn about the people? Margaret Mead was like, bet, get on a plane, hop over there, lives there for like 3 to 5 years, learns their language, learns their habits, learns everything. And she just happened to find that part of the culture interesting and wrote a bunch of books and whatever, so on and so forth. if you look closely at her research, she actually has a lot of research about other things in their culture, because if you live there, there's a lot of things that happen. But it was those specific things that made her famous, that people know about, obviously, right? So that is classic ethnography. You're literally going there and trying your best to live the group of people that you're studying. You're trying to live their life as closely as possible. Okay. For example, when I did my ethnography, I did it on a bunch of families that came and their kids had to take the SHSAT, which is the specialized high school exam. So I would try my best to be with them at all times. Like I would take the kids home sometimes. I would eat with them sometimes. I'll take them to the tutoring, whatever, so on and so forth. Right now, what's very important though is that you have to be in their perspective, or sorry, living through their life, because it's through living their life that you can get a clear understanding of what they're doing, right, or what they're thinking. So, for example, right, if I told you my kid watches TV after he gets home, okay, now what that looks like to you, okay, just imagine the kid going home, is going to be different from what someone from Iowa thinks of that statement, right? How do you get home here in New York City? Take the train, take the bus. If you what's it called? If it's at the right time, maybe I'll pick you up, or maybe you'll go to after school program, then I'll pick you up, whatever, right, and go home. That looks very different in Iowa, guarantee you. But because we're saying things like my kid watches TV when he goes home, we assume we have an understanding of what that looks like, but we don't actually. Okay, so that's why it's very important, right? So, like, for example, if people were to come from Iowa to do research in New York City, they'd be like, oh yeah, the kids here, they take the train home, they hang out, they go here, they go there, they do this, and then they go home, and they're home at like 7 p.m. or whatever. When in Iowa, it's probably like they get off school, they do either do after school activity and then go straight home. Different, similar but different lives, and it's very important to have an anthropologist in that situation, because the words don't accurately communicate what's going on. Okay. Now that's ethnography, right? Now ethnology, it's not that important. Ethnology is basically a book report, a glorified book report. It's for when professors get like really old and really famous and they can't do their own research, and so instead of doing their own research, they compare a bunch of other people's research to each other. It's not very useful. Don't worry about it. Okay. So now let's look at this last question. What advantage would social culture anthropology have over other fields when researching groups of people? The advantage is simply that they go deeper, right? They just understand more about their day-to-day lives, and because they understand more about their day-to-day lives, they have a better understanding of their perspectives in general, right? So compare, for example, what I just explained, the ethnography examples, to journalism, right? Journalism, your house burnt down. How do you feel, right? There's that immediate response, okay? Social culture anthropology is more like, okay, your house burnt down. Let me live with you or through you, or be as with you as much as possible. Did you go use a hotel? Did you stay at your relative's house? Did you file insurance claims? How difficult was that? What was difficult about filing insurance claims? What was difficult about finding all this information when your house burned down? So on and so forth. See? So it's more about like kind of the way in which the social culture anthropologist does their research that's a little bit different from other fields. Okay. So, archaeology. This is probably the most famous form of anthropology. Archaeology reconstructs cultural patterns, often of prehistoric populations. Archaeology focuses primarily on the archaeological record, material evidence of human modification of the physical environment, such as stone tools, pottery, metalwork, textiles, and other technology. So, this one's pretty straightforward. They look at, things of the past. If you're familiar with Indiana Jones, kind of Tomb Raider, kind of, but those people are supposed to be archaeologists, right? They're supposed to look for things in ancient civilizations and find out more about a human history. Okay, so although archaeologists usually study the past, what are some ways people or cultures today can benefit from the research? This is a very obvious question, but if you think about a lot of the things that we do today, it's all built off of stuff from the past. It has to be, right? Of course. But the more important thing is, I want to ask you, how do you think banking came about? Like, I'm sure many of you have online banking, right? Most of you probably do. How did we get to that point? What did it start out as? And how did it evolve into online banking as we know it today? And if you look at online banking, for example, in a different country, it is different, Why is that? Right? That's what archaeology kind of shed some light. Why do we fish the way we do? Why do we, I don't know. Why do we have zoos? You'd be surprised how many answers to why we do certain things is in our past. Okay. Now, biological, physical. So, if you probably haven't already noticed, I am very passionate and knowledgeable about social culture anthropology. That's because that's where my degree is in. I am not so knowledgeable about archaeology or biological physical anthropology because it's kind of like the opposite of what I do. Okay, not the opposite, but in terms of skills, it's very different. Biological anthropology is a study of human biological diversity through time as it exists today in the world today. So biological anthropology is literally just biology. But again, the difference is that it focuses on humans. That's it. Okay. That's the biggest difference. So in fact, a lot of times, like, how about this one? Paleontology, right? Like people who dig up dinosaurs, like people who dig up dinosaurs are not archaeologists. Why? Because they're concerned about dinosaurs, not about humans. That being said, though, a lot of their training is the same, like how to dig up artifacts without damaging them and so on and so forth, right? The same thing with biological anthropologists. Their training in biology is almost exactly the same. It's just that their focus is different, okay? Some of the examples of what biological anthropologists study is human evolution, such as anatomy changes, human genetics, such as human migration disease, human growth and development, such as lactose tolerance or intolerance. Fun fact there is, unfortunately, have you ever heard the thing where Asians are lactose intolerant? The reason why that was found out was because during the Vietnam War, the Americans were doing research on how to basically kill Vietnamese people without killing American soldiers, and that's how they found out that essentially that a lot of Asian people were lactose intolerant. Even or a more biological fun fact is if you grow up drinking milk, you will develop the enzyme to digest lactose. If you do not grow up drinking milk, you will not have it. So very interesting. Human biological plasticity, such as how your body reacts to the heat, cold, and altitude. So when it's hot, obviously, you sweat. When you're cold, you shiver. And what's interesting is people who live in high altitudes have higher lung capacities. Yeah, so you live at a higher altitude, your lung capacity is a little bit better. And finally, my personal favorite in this section is primatology, which is the study of non-human primates, such as the study of chimpanzee DNA and how close it is to humans. Okay, these are all just different examples of biological anthropology. And most of this stuff you might have even learned in class. So although this is probably your first time formally interacting with anthropology, where could you previously have learned about anthropological research but didn't know? And the obvious answer to that is your biology or physiology class in high school or whatever. A lot of this stuff you've already learned, and it's not because they're the same necessarily, but because they're biological anthropologists, a lot of times they'll just put biologist as their like academic background. But in fact, if it has to do with humans, it's most or like evolution and stuff like that, it has to do with humans, it's usually an anthropologist that did that research. All right. Last one, linguistic anthropology. Linguistic anthropology considers diversity among languages. It also studies how speech changes in social situations and over time. Study of languages reveals the cultural factors that shape language use. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Again, linguistics and linguistic anthropology are different. Linguistics is the pure study of language, which is like, hey, like sentence structures, syntax, diction, right? How to use the words in this way. And linguistic anthropology has that training, but is more interested in how language is used in human stuff, right? So, like, for example, like if you say I'm mad tight, how do you learn that? How do you know it's appropriate? When to use that? When is it inappropriate? How do you know it's inappropriate? Those types of questions, right? And in fact, I think the type of thing that they're interested in is this example on the bottom. In American English, what can you infer about American society through the differences of miss, misses, and miss? So basically, what can you tell about American society through these three different labels for women, right? And the easiest thing to conclude is that they treat women differently than men in American society. That's it, right? So even just through like a small little like sentence, you can actually tell a lot about society or learn a lot about society. All right, great. There are two types of anthropology. There's academic and then there's applied. Academic has the goal of discovering more about humanity and adding to the pool of knowledge that exists in anthropology. Applied is using the tools provided by anthropology to solve contemporary social issues. So there's advantages and disadvantages of both of them. So academic is quite frankly more boring. Applied is more exciting, right? Academic is like kind of like, oh, I'm doing this for the sake of understanding things about humans. And applied is like, hey, I really care about this certain topic, like social justice or women's rights or migration, whatever it is. And then they both do research on the things. The problem with applied anthropology is that sometimes they'll go into their topics bias. So, for example, like let's talk about Margaret Mead. Let's say that they weren't interested in gender sexuality, then they would completely like disregard that aspect of it, right? Because they're only focused on I don't know, like how Samoans eat, let's say, right? They'll completely ignore the gender sexuality part of it, and then the research will not reflect how interesting the formation of a woman or of a man in Samoa is, right? That's the problem that applied, is that it's kind of because they're so focused on their thing, they're not going to notice the other things that are probably just as interesting or just as important. Academic has the opposite problem, where it looks at all these different things but can't kind of lock, or it's difficult for them to lock down what's interesting and what should be talked about often, right? And that's also part of the reason why anthropology is not a very popular topic in college. Now sociology is more popular. Why is that? It's not because it's better or worse. It's because it talks about things that are more prevalent to people, and if you can identify it, then you're in a better place. Okay. All right. So let's do full circle. What other academic fields are similar to anthropology? There's a lot of academic fields, right? Let's talk about the obvious ones first, right? Biology, linguistics, paleontology, right? These are all things that are related to this. But again, the focus is what? In anthropology, the focus is always humanity, right? And that's the main thing you need to keep in mind, because anthropology is so broad, it's very easy to get like, oh shoot, is this anthropology? Is this no? Don't worry about it, right? You probably if you've watched the show Bones, right? Bones. She's a forensic anthropologist, and you're like, what the heck, Professor Fong? What does that go under? What do you think? Does it go under social cultural? No. Does it go archaeology? Maybe. Not really though. Does it go under linguistic? Definitely not. It goes under biological, right? Because she's talking about the biology of bones breaking and stuff like that. Okay, so food anthropology, right? Food anthropology, depending on what they're studying, it could go under social cultural, or it could go under bio, or actually it could go under linguistic too, or even archaeology. Depending on what they're studying, it could go under anything. But the main point is, again, it's not necessarily the topic in which they're studying, it's more of like the focus, right? And sometimes, especially, so for example, I gave you social culture anthropology and sociology. What's the difference there? The only difference is the method in which they go about it. Okay, but don't worry, we're gonna go over this some more later. Just keep in mind that anthropology is different, not necessarily because it's actually that different, but more because of the methods they use, and also it's focused on humanity. That's it. Okay. I hope you guys found that interesting. We're gonna have a lot more of that. Make sure to submit quiz week 1 to reflection 1 by tomorrow. And if you have any questions, just shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.